Hello, welcome. My name is Alexander Chee. I am a novelist and essayist. Most recently, the author of How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, and this year it was my honor to be the judge for Aspen Words. Today I am talking to one of our finalists, the incredible Valeria Luiselli, author of the essay collection Sidewalks, the essay Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions, and the novels Faces in the Crowd, The Story of My Teeth, and this year's finalist, The Lost Children Archive. Valeria, how are you?
I'm okay, thank you. Keeping it together, reinventing every day as it comes.
Yeah. So in getting ready to do this conversation, we talked a little bit about how we proceed, and we settled on Valeria beginning by reading a short excerpt from The Lost Children Archive.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, there's some background noise. It's raining outside and it's kind of loud.
The air conditioner?
Exactly, it's exactly that sound. Oh my God, it's very impressive that you're able to pick it up exactly for what it is. So I hope it's not too loud or that it just merges with our conversation seamlessly. This is a moment in which the family is on the road, and the little boy, who's a stepson of the narrator, and is 10 years old, is trying to figure out how to use a Polaroid camera. But every time that he uses it, pictures come out, and then they come out all white. So he's figuring it out, right? How to use it. As we drive further west into Tennessee, we pass more and more abandoned gas stations, empty churches, closed motels, stores and factories that have shut down. Looking out the window and through the lens of his camera, the boy asks me again, "So what does it mean, Ma, to document stuff?" I try and answer. Documenting just means to collect things of the present for posterity. What do you mean, posterity? I just mean for later. I'm not sure, though, what for later means anymore. Something changed in the world. Not too long ago, it changed. And we know it. We don't know how to explain it yet, but I think we can all feel it somewhere deep in our gut or in our brain circuits. We feel time differently. No one has quite been able to capture what is happening or say why. Perhaps it's just that we sense an absence of future because the present has become too overwhelming, so the future has become unimaginable. And without future, time feels like only an accumulation of months, days, natural disasters, television series, terrorist attacks, divorces, mass migrations, birthdays, photographs, sunrises. We haven't understood the exact way we are now experiencing time. And maybe the boy's frustration at not knowing what to take a picture of or how to frame it and focus the things he sees as we sit inside the car, driving across this strange, beautiful, dark country, is simply a sign of how our ways of documenting the world have fallen short. Perhaps if we found a new way to document it, we might begin to understand this new way we experience space and time. Novels and movies don't quite capture it. Journalism doesn't. Photography, dance, painting, and theater don't. Molecular biology and quantum physics certainly don't either. We haven't understood how space and time exist now, how we really experience them. And until we find a way to document them, we won't understand them. Finally, I tell the boy, you just have to find your own way of understanding space so that the rest of us can feel less lost in time. Okay, Ma, he says, but how much longer till we get to our next stop?
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's interesting to hear you read that line about the unimaginable, given when you wrote that and where we are now. The novel, for those of you who haven't read it yet, is we could say, a response to work that you were doing at the time with undocumented children who had been separated from their families. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's an accurate statement. I began thinking about the novel and making notes for it in the summer of 2014, which was the peak, I guess, although there were several peaks afterwards, of the refugee crisis, the refugee children crisis. That is a diaspora of children arriving alone and undocumented, mostly from the Northern Triangle in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, to ask for some form of immigration relief, usually political asylum, but sometimes other forms of immigration relief. And that summer was when this situation exploded in the news. Around 60,000 children had arrived between October of 2013 and June, July of 2014. And so a crisis was declared. Of course, it was declared on the basis of institutional capacity more than on the basis of the reality that these children were facing. And the Obama administration changed a policy, an important policy. And by changing this policy, what they produced was something called a priority juvenile docket, which was a way of putting all the cases of all these children together and giving them priority in court. But priority meant basically that they became a priority for the courts. So they had less time in being able to get a lawyer to defend them against deportation. Previous to that policy change, they had an entire year to find a lawyer to defend them. And now they only had 21 days. So it was like a deportation machine that just got accelerated. So I became involved in the courts as a translator to try and screen and translate as many children as possible, get their cases in English, and then find lawyers to represent them. So I became involved in that way in those years.
And I'm curious, how much of the process for writing this novel came out of that experience, and how much of it grew out of previous ways that you've used documentary in your work, like in The Story of My Teeth, or in your work as a journalist?
The thing is, when I'm writing fiction or nonfiction, or when I'm writing anything, when I'm embarking on a project, I never know. First of all, at the beginning, I never know if I'm going to do it in Spanish or in English, which sometimes just means that I postpone beginning for a year, and I just take notes bilingually, and then eventually one language takes over. And I never know what genre will be the right vehicle either, right? I'm not ever sure at the beginning if it's nonfiction what I have to embark on, or fiction, or even within the genres. I never know which architecture the piece that I need to write needs to have, and it takes me a long time to decide all of that. And it's through documentary practices and engaging with the small archive of stuff that I amass in order to relate to that material, asking that material questions and exploring it. It's only in that very intense process that I very slowly start to understand which language, which genre, and within the genre, which architecture, which form, right? And so when I started writing this novel, Lost Children Archive, I had I had just one vague intuition in mind, and it didn't really have to do with migration as much as it had to do with the question of how intergenerational storytelling evolves, and how we pass on the story of the world to the younger generations that is full of foundational myths that we assume, and that is full of assumptions and full of forms of normalizing which should not be normalized, and how we pass on that story, and then how children kind of deconstruct it and re-articulate it. And I wanted to explore that passage of storytelling from generation to generation. So that was like an initial intuition. As I continued to become involved in the migration crisis and hear children telling their stories, I started thinking about this more deeply, right? And about how to do this. At the beginning, when I was writing the novel, I was also working in court as a screener and translator for kids. And I was often coming back home and kind of just bringing the stories that I was hearing into the fictional fabric of the novel, changing things, and then calling that fiction, until I stopped and said, you know, this is not ethical, and this is not aesthetically interesting, right? So I was doing a disservice both to my guild by writing a really boring novel, just full of like this transposition, but also not doing a service to what I was becoming very deeply involved in, which was this crisis, by trying to simply translate, as in carry over a story that I was listening to, and then putting it inside the framework of a fictional fabric. So I stopped writing the novel completely. I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, which is just a very straightforward way of denouncing what I was seeing in the immigration courts. And after writing Tell Me How It Ends, I was able to go back to the novel and not think that the novel had to be, not feel the responsibility of writing a novel that was a means to an end, a means to a political end, or in other words, not instrumentalizing the novel or thinking of it as a hammer to hit people in the head in, but more what a novel is. And I mean, a novel is a space in which you live in for a while as a reader, right? It can't be a hammer that you're getting hit with. So it's a space where people breathe, and where people make love, and where people get divorced, and where people suck their thumb, and not in that order, obviously, but all of that.
That's a beautiful point to make, and I think it leads to my next question, which is, what do you think a novel can do on this subject that other kinds of writing about it won't be able to do? Is it about that space? Something else also?
Yeah, I think though that a novel cannot be thought of by the writer as an instrument, right? Because I think that a novel can do a lot of things for us as readers. But I think that when the writer's intention is too present, when there's too much control about what a novel should do to the reader, readers feel that. You know, I mean, I don't think you can go into fiction with a pedagogical intention or one of like convincing through pathos, or I mean, and it's also just so hard to write a novel that you can't be thinking, you can't be in control of it that way, right? I think it really is more a space that you create. Now, I think I can answer your question better as a reader, and that is like, I think that a novel is borrowed memory. Like the novels that I read intensely, that shook me inside emotionally and intellectually, are novels that become indelible and are part of my lived experience, right? So it's like a prosthetic memory, or not really. It's just part of the memory of your lived experience. So novels can make our experience of the world more complex, more beautiful sometimes, just richer, because our memory is somehow also coexisting with another person or many other minds. All of them here, you know. I mean, every time in these very difficult times, I sit in front of these books, I just I often say, I'm not religious, but I guess I'm a little bit spiritual. I look at them and then I just ask, I ask for help, like, tell me where to go. Give me a good idea. Yeah.
But we are at the end of our time, unfortunately, but thank you for this indelible moment.
Thank you, Alex. I always enjoy speaking to you very, very much.
Likewise.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing you, and I mean it, like seeing you. Take care. All right, bye-bye. Do we hang up? Or?
I don't